The year is 1979, and director Bob Fosse takes the opportunity to gather all the best and worst aspects of his life and show business and relentlessly beats us across the face with them in this self-indulgent, self-deprecating, and practically perfect pseudo-autobiographical fever dream. Roy Scheider plays Joe Gideon, Broadway legend, choreographer to the stars, as well as a hesitant filmmaker. After suffering life-threatening health altercations due to an existence of excess, we travel through the slideshow of his dreams and nightmares, all set to the songs, dances, and razzle-dazzle that only Bob Fosse could deliver. And with that, it's showtime, folks. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. All right, man. All that jazz. 1979. I did see this way too young. It was a favorite of my mom's. I grew up with this movie. I've already talked about it several times on the show. She was like into musical dance theater, getting an acting degree. So anything Bob Fosse, anything theatrical was just kind of like drilled into me at a young age. But there is something about this movie that's just, I think, really special. Apart from the musical numbers, and we'll get into that. But first and foremost, like I always do, I have to ask you, what was your experience with this movie the first time? And is this a movie that's like been a part of your life as you've like grown up cinematically?
This one I didn't see till I was actually in high school. So I got really into Broadway, really into jazz. I know we've had conversations like this in the past that I love musical theater. And I really came to be around high school. And this one really did trigger me to the point where I didn't really like it at first. And this was one of those first movies that I was dedicated. I had to like this. So I went back numerous times to view it. And this is one of those movies that grows on you to the point where you gain something every single time that you watch it, and you appreciate it a lot more. And it's one of those that it stuck with me after I think about 2 to 3 viewings of it. So, which I really did end up really appreciating the style, the performances, and the honesty from Bob Fosse.
Well, I mean, this was one of the earliest examples for me as a kid about what death really looks like. You know, because cinematically growing up, you think of The Fox and the Hound and Bambi and Land Before Time. You know, you're seeing death displayed melodramatically. And this is the first film that I distinctly remember being traumatized by the reality of what death could look like, from the surgery scenes to the scenes of just failing health. And then that's just, you know, perfect closing shot of the movie. We'll get into all that later. But there's something really interesting about this film and the way it plays to certain people and how it plays to our critics that we're going to be talking about today. There's a bait and switch to this movie that I think a lot of people weren't ready for. Bob Fosse, as a filmmaker, people knew him for Sweet Charity and Cabaret, right? Like the jazz, choreographing of Damn Yankees with Gwen Verdon. Like, people knew what Bob Fosse was. They knew what he was doing on Broadway. They knew that he created this whole new style of jazz and performance. So when a movie called All That Jazz hits the theaters, I think a lot of them were expecting, oh, it's the new Bob Fosse musical. What they didn't expect is that this guy literally took all of the most negative, I'm not going to say disgusting, but guilt-laden moments of his life and put them on paper and put them on screen and turned them into a musical. So when I said, like in my little opening, that it is self-indulgent and self-deprecating, well, it kind of has to be, because that really is the story of this dude's life. And without this particular person in the entertainment industry, well, it just wouldn't look the same that it does today.
You're 100% right because I even fell into that trap when I first watched it too, thinking a movie entitled All That Jazz with Bob Fosse at the helm. So there's a lot of elements, and I didn't know a lot going into it. I knew the title, I knew Bob Fosse, and I knew this was going to be a fantastic musical experience. And I think you're right. A lot of people went into it with the wrong expectation, and whether you're going to come out of it, and I know we'll talk about that later, um, with kind of almost a depressed feeling of the opposite of what we've seen from a lot of the Bob Fosse feel good musicals or the feel good choreography. So
Right.
it's enough to kind of paint a picture of the wrong impression of what Fosse wanted. And mind you, this happened right after. This is his first movie after his heart attack. And we can call it self
Right.
indulgent, but this is a guy that put almost, so to speak, his heart onto paper on his fears and a lot of the things that he's experienced and how he relates those experiences in this movie. So I think there is a lot of honesty to this movie. And I think people went into it not expecting that.
Well, yeah, because only he could make a movie about himself and really have it be as honest and visually stunning as it is. I mean, that's the thing. It's like this, I'm going to honestly say, is one of the most unique films that I've ever seen. Like, I've never seen a film like this. I don't think we will ever see a film like this. It is its own perfect little entity because rarely does someone get to make a movie about themselves that's not glamorizing, you know? Like we've seen people produce their own biopics. We've seen people cameo in their own biopics, and it covers up a lot of shit. If anything, this guy's like, well, let's make the shit that happened in my life even more disgusting, even more self deprecating, and really express the self indulgence. Because, if you know the guy, you know his story, there are so many echoes of his life to the fact where he had like his real life mistress play his mistress in the movie. Like things like that, you don't get to see that often. And for me, that is a sign of not only a guy who's 100% secure with all of his flaws, but a guy with the confidence to make a film about his flaws, include his real life flaws in the movie to the point where the address on the pill bottle that says Joel Gideon was his actual home address. Like people could have gone and knocked on his door had they just gone to the address on the pill bottle. That's how much of himself he put into this movie. And you just don't see that. And the fact that it is a musical, the fact that it is a pseudo autobiography, and the fact that it does have a lot of gripping drama, but also some really great laughs and performances. I'm going to go back to what I said. I've never seen a film like it, and I don't think we'll ever see a film like it ever again.
Oh, 100%. Because we look at this movie and we have a lot of these biopics that come out that, like you said, they pick and choose what they want to put in, or we just go full blown, all dirty laundry. This isn't just dirty
Right.
laundry. This is a person's motivation throughout his actions. This is him from point A to point B when it comes to what drove him to his mental state or his fate, because you see a character, the angel of death is what I think we call her in the movie, where we
Hmm.
see that almost from the first couple of acts where we kind of anticipate what he's viewing and what he's facing or what the outcome's going to be. And it's this movie coming to grips with his, I guess you want to say, almost fatality, his fate. And he has to come to terms with what his actions resulted to. And we kind of see that crescendo towards the end of the movie where he's coming to grips on his mentality of what led up to. This not only is honest, but important and unique, but it is actually a brilliant character study. And we can even tie it into the previous movie, Lenny, where it almost feels like these two go
Hmm.
hand in hand. And we see a little bit of the Lenny movie in All That Jazz, which I could we could
Yeah,
see
we
a,
do.
we could have a whole topic on these two movies together. But it is interesting to me on how much he covers with not just the dirty laundry, but his self admission on the things that he knows he did, and he's not scared to show it. And I think that's what makes this movie extremely unique. I had to dust this movie off from my media shelf because it's hard. You can't really get it anywhere on streaming. But
Mhm.
I think we chatted this morning that we're both, I think, viewed it 3 times uh, repeatedly, and each and every time I enjoyed it more and more. I kept taking things away from this, and I kept taking notes on not just the movie, but the man of Bob Fosse. And that's the unique piece of this movie is you can just zero in on this character and take something unique away from the filmmaking experience that you will not see anywhere else in movies.
I really want to get into like the filmmaking aspect and the accolades that it got before we get into the reviewers' critiques of it. But we do have to talk about the performances because Roy Scheider, in my opinion, delivers the best performance of his career in this movie. And when I listen to the commentary on the Criterion, the editor of the film does the commentary for it. There's something I didn't know about it, that Richard Dreyfuss was the original person cast as Joe
Really?
Gideon in the film. And he was having a lot of complications with Bob Fosse because Dreyfuss was playing Fosse as an effeminate neurotic, which that's Dreyfuss 100%, but that's not Fosse. So he's like, you can't play me like this because no one wants to fuck that guy and everyone wants to fuck me. I need someone that can like ooze charm, but at the same time still have an air of mystery to him. Roy Scheider was the perfect guy for this. And the dude's not a dancer. The dude's not like a theatrical performer. He's a serious dramatic actor. But that goes to show how brilliant that performance is because, when you are a director of that caliber, you're not choreographing shit. Like you can explain to your head choreographer assistant what you want the moves to be, and they know your brain and your style so well that they'll do it. So he didn't have to dance. And the little motions that he does of movements, because he does do a few, you buy it because he's just spotting, right? He's not doing the full performance. Where the performance is the man that is in pain, the man that is chronically dying of angina, the dude that's smoking 40 cigarettes a day and taking speed and waking up and having the same morning routine of showering, coughing up blood in the shower and saying, all right, it's showtime, folks. Let's get it going. That's the character. And Scheider is so convincing of it. And it's funny for me too, because like, yeah, I knew who Bob Fosse was by face and recognition from performances, but you never see what he was like behind the scenes unless you're looking at interviews and stuff. And the editor of the film and Anne Reinking herself said, oh yeah, Scheider captured Fosse's persona and anima 100%. Like that was the guy. The point where that movie literally is the closest thing you'll get to like a documentary of this dude's life. Like that's how great that performance was.
Yeah, Scheider has more of a neutral approach to it, and Dreyfuss, I think, would have forteed that way too much. And what I find interesting is the fact that you take Bob Fosse, who in the beginning scenes, we see him just pointing and kicking people out of the dance line, where he's basing it off of, yeah, the dance moves, the talent, what have you, the looks, if you may. Uh, and Dreyfuss, I think, would have pulled off the look factor of it, but the personality factor, even if you take off his direction on it, I don't think he would have pulled it off. He has a dominant presence on screen where he owns the screen. And what I like about Scheider is the fact that he is, again, the neutral piece where he plays with our emotions, where we don't know how we feel about him. If you've never been introduced to Fosse before, you kind of just go along for the ride. You see his actions, but you don't feel anything towards him until you get really deep into the movie. And I think that's what's really brilliant about this performance is we're trying to discover, we're going along with this journey and we're waiting for the punchline at the end of who this guy is. And at the end of the movie, we don't necessarily hate him, but we don't like him, but we do come to terms with him just like he's doing with himself.
Yes, that's 100% correct. And there's one thing that Anne Reinking and all the different people that were in the commentary and supplemental features said is that, yes, what the film represents of him being a perfectionist, demanding perfection, but never cruel. that really comes off impressive, because usually when you think about these Broadway directors, choreographers, to the stars, all these people that you think of, like Vincent Cassel in Black Swan, with a iron fist and a rod, and whoosh, we're gonna whip you into shape. Where Fosse's character in this, Joe Gideon, does it more with like a psychological approach. He only says, like, I can't make you a great dancer. I might not even make you a good dancer. I can make you a better dancer. And just that is the motivation for that person to become a good dancer. It doesn't have to come from the whip. And I think that's one of the interesting things of this character of, like, yeah, he's a womanizer, he's a drunk, he's a speed freak, he's an egomaniac, but we don't hate him because he does have a respect for the craft and the respect for the artists that are pursuing their learning in the craft. And that's what keeps him on the level of, like, okay, I'll watch 2 hours of this guy die and have an emotional connection, because he's not a total asshole. That's where the perfection is. Now, the echoes of real life, too, of the people that they have in this movie. So Leland Palmer as Audrey, which is, the synonymous figure for Gwen Verdon, who was his lifelong wife. Just they separated because he just could not stay faithful, but they had a connection that they portray very well and tastefully in this movie. Ezerbet Foldy is his daughter Michelle. Great performance there from this young girl. And Ryan King essentially playing herself as the mistress, but also like ingenue that he discovered. Those are the main three people in his life. And then, as you spoke earlier, Angelique, the Angel of Death, played by Jessica Lange in one of her first roles. That's where this movie where it drifts in and out of like the metaphysical is really confusing for some people, but I think it's 100% absorbing. And I think that is what really makes this movie for me, is that we see his plane of existence, and then we see him literally talking to death as he's making his journey throughout this film.
And this is where I think a lot of people kind of got it wrong or went off the first impression, because this is one of those movies I defined as impossible to judge with just one viewing.
Yeah.
This is one of those, once you get the context of it, and I know I preach this all the time and I shouldn't, but it's first reactions when you see a movie. At the end of the day, that's what you pay money for. That's what you are getting. But this is the one exception that I'm going to say, this 100%, you have to see a minimum second time to really appreciate that. Because when we start to go back and really see Bob Fosse, or Gideon, excuse me, with the Angel of Death, that's when we really start to see an appreciation. And I think this is where we get that proper balance too, of how we can't really hate him, because we're kind of seeing what he's facing, his own mortality. And I think that's what really balances this movie out brilliantly, is we kind of get that in the beginning, and we don't just get that at the end, where you kind of have that cliche of face your mortality with this one character at the end. We follow this throughout the entire runtime. And I think it's a brilliant direction and brilliant writing by Fosse to really include that environment, not just have this dreamlike state, but he actually includes the environment to actually make it relatable on what's going on. And that's what really added to the confusion of what's going on, is that setting. But now if you go back and watch it, it makes sense, and why the filmmakers are describing this during that time with the Angel of Death.
Well, I mean, and there's so many layers to that too. We could peel apart this for hours, but we don't. We only have another 15 minutes before we start talking about Siskel and Ebert's thoughts on this. What I liked about these multiple viewings is you realize that when you are in his dream states, the foreshadowing of his death, the setting is chaotic. It's jumbled furniture and set pieces and lights and broken down stages, because his mind is chaotic. Because from that chaotic mind comes masterful direction, choreography, and vision on stage. That's how I think most real artists and creators work, is their mind is a jumble, and putting those pieces together is what creates the tapestry of art and the tapestry of wonder. But there's something else that I kind of realized too in the last viewing. To really understand this movie, you have to understand the struggles of all the people that love him. So it hurts to love this man. It hurts to be his daughter. It hurts to be his wife. It hurts to be the mistress, and it hurts to be anyone that is either financing him or is employed by him. It hurts to love this man because this man only really truly loves himself. And in my opinion, he loves this idea of death, the final curtain, the final show. That's what Angelique represents, because there is that scene early on where we go back in time to the burlesque days and his mom is like cooking a stove talking to death and saying he's always been infatuated with you. He's always loved you. So you can tell that, yes, he might have loving feelings for the people in his life, including his daughter, but he's so selfish and self-absorbed that you can tell he only truly loves himself and the idea of the end. I've seen this movie dozens of times, man, and it's really like the last few viewings where I start getting what I think he's telling me with this film. And like you said, you can't get that on the first watch.
No, and it's interesting that you say that because I think last night when I watched it for the third time, there is a pivotal moment, and I love this scene so much, is when you have the apartment dance number where they play What's Old Is New Again. And you just watch his reaction. It's almost like he has a hard time even enjoying that, or he's trying to, but he doesn't want to show emotion to it. And to me, this is one of Snyder's best moments because this is where he has to really hold it in to really stay in character. Because if you take any musical, any fluff film, this is a pivotal scene where you have that feel good moment. And it doesn't go that route here. This is the real transition of the character where you say, I kind of got this guy pegged. And I love the fact you called it the final curtain, because when we get to that, he makes closure with the sub characters, his wife and all that, where we're singing that your baby found somebody new. And there's happiness. And he just whispers that one line, you don't have to catch me anymore. So he makes that closure for them. And I love that strategy because it does end on a satisfying note that we're not just ignoring those characters and he's coming to terms and saying almost his final goodbyes, but they're not goodbyes. He's solidifying what he's done. And I love that aspect of it.
Well, I mean, because it kind of shows in the pessimistic view of Fosse through Joe Gideon that the fantasy is a lie. The fantasy isn't real. Like, if you want that fantasy, you can't get there without death, without destruction and lies and deceit and cheating and all the different things that he's doing. Without any of those things that hurt people, he cannot have the fantasy. So there's the juxtaposition in that. That ending 100% too, but I don't want to get there quite yet because there's so much in between. Like, this movie is very jumbled in its non-linear time frames, right? Like, the main story progresses linearly, but it also has a lot of flashbacks and flash forwards of death and this and that. So halfway through the film, when he actually has his heart attack and ends up in the hospital, we forget that he's in the hospital for half the movie because it really shows so many different things that have happened in the past or that's happening while he's in the hospital. It keeps the thing flowing. It keeps us from spending 40 minutes in a hospital setting by bringing in these fantasy numbers, by bringing in the fact that his financiers are looking at John Lithgow, who's another prominent New York director, to take his place, or let him die. And if he dies before the 1st of February, they get their $1 million insurance policy. Like, there's so many things riding on this dude's life that he never ever considered until his life was almost over. That's the secondary story that a lot of people, I think, miss because they're waiting for the next musical number, like you do in any musical. So some people call that film a jumbled mess, and it's edited funny, and it's sporadic. I think that is what goes on in a person's brain as they know that they're dying, and they're wondering what the hell is going on in the world outside of this hospital room, and how is my death affecting it? Like, it's brilliant.
It is. And I think they did the right thing by going that route because you take a lot of I think it shows the prime example of the industry he's in, what goes on in the back scene. We paint a picture and it supports kind of where his mind has gone and what he's had to deal with. And I think it really does support, just like the Angel of Death, kind of the mental stability that he had and the things he had to deal with. So, because most of these conversations we have out of the hospital, they're not positive messaging. I mean, it's
No.
collaborations, it's negative. You have John Lithgow that just kind of appears like an asshole who wants this job. And I think it's, to me, I love the fact that they point out the evil of the industry more than the character and let the audience decide for that. So I think it's a
Right.
brilliant strategy that they did, because what the movie really needed this to really support where the character was going to go. So if they spent, like you said, all that time in the hospital still focusing on this character while he's facing his mortality in bed, I think that would have been a misdirection. I think it was a brilliant supporting scene.
I mean, it kind of speaks to the interesting way that the film is sequential, because although it's chaotic and sporadic, it really does have three definite acts. Act one is the anticipation of success, right? The show's got to be a hit. You got to get this role. You're going to sleep with the director to get it, like all the things that you do for success. And then act two shows the price of success, where this is what a life of this strive to be successful and the strive for ego. This is where it gets you. This is what happens. You end up with a heart attack in the hospital. And then act three is the final cost, which is a death where you have to create a fantasy where people are going to cherish you, because you know that really on the outside, there's a lot of people that hate you for your success. There's a lot of people that hate you for all the things you've done to them because of your ego, and people that are just waiting to get your job once you're dead, or the $1 million insurance policy. So what do? You create this grand spectacle final closing act where Ben Vereen joins you on stage and you sing Bye Bye Love, except it's Bye Bye Life, where you've got topless dancers, you got everyone you know and love in the audience, and you make peace with people that you haven't even met. Like, I don't even know if he met John Lithgow's character in the movie, but he's there and he shakes hands with them as if like, okay, yeah, you're going to do a good job taking my spot, before finally passing on, and that brilliant closing shot of the body bag zipping and then cut to black. Oh,
It's
like
it's mesmerizing.
punctuation.
That
Absolutely.
one shot is just mesmerizing. And what's brilliant about this is there's so many imperfections in this final dance number, but it's so engaging and it's fun, even though it shouldn't be fun, because it's surrounding facing immortality and death. But there's so many vocal imperfections, so many choreographed imperfections, and it's just them on stage. And I think it's a good exclamation mark of him realizing, as being a perfectionist, that this is his final moment. He doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to have the perfect note. He doesn't have to hit the perfect uh, leg jump or whatever. But I think when we get to this spectacle, it's hard to look away, because we want to see where this character goes with it. The music song choice is great, and the closure. So I think with all the elements combined, it really tells a story summed up of what he's going through in a less than 5-minute dance number. So I really did enjoy this. And I think I made my wife watch it the first time, and she didn't really get it, but she loved that final moment because it really does take your breath away.
There's something very meta about that whole thing too, from the whole hospital scene on, is that he's directing his own death. As he's lying in a hospital bed, he's literally in the director's chair, or he's on the crane. He's all over the place directing the way he wants his death to be. Now, there's something very oddly prophetic about it, and they talk about this in the review, where he died in 87. This movie is 79, 80, right? But it's like he knew how he was going to die. He knew what was going to happen. So it's almost as if he was making this film as a sense of directing his own death in real life. That's the way it feels to me. Like, he has it nailed so perfectly. He died on a street corner from a massive heart attack as he was on his way to direct a show. There's a scene almost exactly like that in the movie, as he's on his way to the theater from the editing room, and he stops and he holds his arm and he thinks that's it. And then he kind of like breathes and calms himself down and goes back to work. Like, the dude saw it coming. I don't believe anything else than that. And this movie was the way to like purge those demons, or so to speak. Like I know what my death is going to be like, so let's make a fucking awesome movie about it, you know?
And that's what makes it really profound, because if we look at just human nature, if somebody came up and said, you knew exactly the day you were going to die, how are you going to go out? And what's going to go through your head? It's almost like a taboo subject when it comes to death. And this is where this last scene really takes us, is to a relatability factor. I know with me, just to get really deep, is it's something that I looked at right when they zipped up that body bag. I'm like, God, I asked my question. If I knew exactly the day, the moment, what would I have to go through? What would I want to go out with? And I think it does raise a lot of questions. And I'm glad they kind of just ended it on that exclamation mark of zipping up the body bag, because that's how impactful a film is. If it can really get you to think and ask some questions and affect you emotionally, because this isn't a tearjerker movie per se, but it is one that really gets deep into the psyche to really get you to think on where your life is at this moment.
It also doesn't give a shit about how much or how little you know about the industry, right? And I think that's one of the things that makes it seem so sincere, is it's going to show you dark sides of the industry that you didn't know existed, and maybe you didn't want to know that existed. And that's the whole point. Like, when we get into the review, that is probably the one thing that really divides our two critics, is the reality of what this movie is, in sense of how the filmmaker and subject of the movie handled it, versus comparing it to things that he's made in the past, which were entertainment pieces that you enjoyed, that won Oscars, that people love. And then, okay, what is the lifestyle behind it? What is the darkness underneath it? I'm going to ruin Oz for you folks. I'm going to show you what this shit really is. I'm going to show you what's behind the curtain, and you're not going to like it, and you're not supposed to like it. And that's why I'm making this movie. And it's funny because Lenny's the very same way. It's like everyone loves a stand-up comic, and Lenny showed us what the life of a profane stand-up comic was like in the 50s and 60s, right? So this is kind of, like you said, they're almost like bookends of each other. And here's an interesting thing too. Quick little fact. The guy that plays the comedian that's supposed to be the movie Lenny that he's editing, well, that's the guy he wanted to play Lenny in his film. He was playing it on Broadway, but they wouldn't hire him because he wasn't a name, so they put Dustin Hoffman in instead. And so he's like, all right, well, I'm going to put him in my movie about making Lenny. How about that? Like, I think that's such like a cool eat it to the studio.
I think that is a really cool fact, but I still wholeheartedly think Dustin Hoffman killed it in Lenny. But
oh yeah, I'm not saying he didn't, but
yeah. Well, it's just, to me, it's like these two movies just go, without going huge into depth, these two movies are like almost like All That Jazz could be a sequel to this. It's almost like two separate character studies on it. And I think it's just, there's so many similarities to Bob Fosse on the characters that he picks, including himself in the second one, that you can really tie these with a bow. And I watched Lenny again the other night, and there's just so much to Bob Fosse as a director. I just wish we had more movies, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, so what's really unfortunate is before he passed away, he had one last film that he really wanted to make. He wanted to make his cinematic version of Chicago. And the person that he wanted to play Roxy was Madonna. 1986 Madonna. I can only imagine what we didn't get with that final picture that sadly never happened because of his health. But alas, as most of the time, we don't speak too much about the movies before we do the episode. Like, I'll show you a picture like, hey, guess what I'm watching? And we might like tease each other about it, but we don't really talk about our opinion of the review or our opinion of the movie until the recording. And this is one of those where it's going to be a little bit of a flip, because the people that I would expect to love this movie don't, and the person that I usually hear talk a lot of shit is its biggest offender. So let's go ahead and hear what these guys had to say about it.
A very entertaining musical number, just the sort of thing we expect from Bob Fosse. Now, I know a lot of people are going to go see All That Jazz and wonder what it's all about. It seems to me that what Fosse has done is sort of write his own obituary on film, the obituary of a creative man was afraid his work just might be trivial. Joe suffers a heart attack and surgery in the movie, and he seems to view the attack as some kind of ultimate punishment for all those times he didn't do his best. At the same time, it's very clear that Joe Gideon and Bob Fosse both love dance, love to watch it, and best of all, they love to create it. So for me, All That Jazz is a fresh film. I found it very entertaining.
So far, he's speaking my language. Like, he gets that we are looking at the inner dramas of the creative process of a very talented yet damaged person who's just full of ego. And that really surprised me when I heard him really speak what I was thinking about this movie. And he only saw it once.
Yeah, this one took me by surprise a little bit too, because I'm with you. I could have sworn with the look, the feel, his favorite word of ugly, that he would have gone that route, because he is not all about the character study. He's more about the story, I guess I would say. So to me, him zeroing in on those focuses really did take me by surprise. And I think he is 100% right. And I think based on all the episodes we've done, I think this is one of his better reviews. And I think he nails a lot of good points.
I found the dance numbers really entertaining. I have a funny reaction to this film. I really love the choreography. There's a lot of energy, a lot of inventiveness there. I didn't like the story of the guy's life. I found it very confused. It's kind of fragmented in a Fellini sort of way. I might get back to that in a second. And he's talking to the woman in white who wanders through the film. He's talking to her about his fears, about his life, and so forth. I couldn't follow it. I couldn't understand it. And I walked out of the theater behind a woman who said, you know, when you go to a musical at holiday time, you don't really expect to see open heart surgery. I think I kind of understand what she was talking about.
He fell for it, man.
He did.
He fell for it.
He did. And this is one of those where I kind of spoke to earlier. I mean, critics go off of that first reaction. They don't usually have the opportunity to go back and see it before they have to hit the deadline on the review. And this is one of those unfortunate things. And he does get into a couple points that, you know what, it might surprise you, but there's some aspects in his review I do agree to an extent, not fully, but to an extent. But I think this is the one I would have loved, because I couldn't find his written review. I mean,
I couldn't either. I looked.
Which I would have loved to read. I wish I could have seen a revisit review, especially during Oscar time, that I would have loved to see his reaction or his follow-up to it, because I know he saw this movie more than once, and I would have loved to see and hear the second reaction to it, because I think this is one of those movies, if I read his material and know him well enough, that this would have been a changed review. Not to make an assumption, but I can guarantee you this one would have been a changed review.
Well, because I also think that if Roger Ebert doesn't know enough about the real life and experiences of Bob Fosse before this movie comes out, well, it's safe to say that the majority of the film-going public didn't either. So this thing was a monster at the Oscars, right? So accolades were given from people that are in the industry that recognize it. But I think there are a lot of people that don't know the industry well enough or knew the subject of the movie well enough to recognize the parallels that Siskel did, and your boy didn't do it this time. Now they have a back and forth about it.
Like the dance and you don't like the story. And you know, that's a common reaction to the picture. And unfortunately, I think that that's exactly what this guy intended, who made the picture, Bob Fosse. He likes the dance, and he doesn't like the story. And the story for him is his own life when he isn't creating dance.
Exactly what we just said. Like, he is speaking my language 100%. This movie is not supposed to entertain you. This movie is supposed to show you what this life of creative genius really is. It's a life of excess and abuse and unfaithfulness and misogyny. Like, there's so much to it, and he's showing you it all, but he's putting a glitter on it, right? He's giving you the razzle dazzle. Siskel knows what he's talking about. He sees it in every aspect of this review.
Yeah, and this is one of those that you base this movie on pure emotion and how you feel about it. And without deep diving, because even Ebert went into the original introduction to the review, just saying the key word, this movie made me feel funny. And this movie is intended to make you feel funny because it's an uncomfortable movie at times. It's an uncomfortable subject matter. It tackles topics that nobody really, one, has a huge amount of knowledge to the general public, and two, like drugs, adultery, all these topics rolled into one film. So, of course, it's going to make you feel funny. And Gene really nails it. He really focuses again on going back to the character, going back to the story. You're not supposed to like the story because this is his intention. So Gene gets it in this one.
Right. The guy who wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls feels funny about the scattered storytelling and ugly perception of the people in the industry. Goodness me.
So I think that the very reaction you had is sort of the proper reaction. And it's a common story. It's not just a show business story. It's a story of people, for professional people, who manage their creative lives very well, and their personal lives go to pot. And I think that he does that very well, Roger.
Well, but there's a funny thing that I kept thinking when I saw the movie. There's a movie called 8½" by Fellini that you know about.
One
it's
of the
very
great
famous,
films.
one of the great films from the 60s, about a movie director who's unsatisfied with his life, who's caught between his wife and his mistress, who is badgered all day long by his backers
A lot
about a
of
project that he
similarities.
can't complete, who's worried about death, and who always talks to this woman in white who is his muse or his angel of death. I think it's kind of ironic. Bob Fosse makes a movie about his own life, and it turns out to be Fellini's life.
So what are you saying? It's not as good as 8½? I agree with you. It's not as good as 8½, but what's up on the screen I found very entertaining.
Okay.
So here's the thing. Obviously, it's 8½. I don't think anyone's going to deny that.
Right.
How about this, Roger? He used the same cameraman and he used the same lighting crew that Fellini used to shoot 8½. Bob Fosse knew exactly what the hell he was doing. He was making the Bob Fosse 8½. And there's nothing wrong with that because all that jazz is still all that jazz. Like, why not take influence from a story that is very recognizable to creative people? You know, you're a choreographer and you're a filmmaker, and there's a movie by a grand master filmmaker about a guy who makes movies, who's an adulterer, who's always talking with the angel of death. Yeah, that story works in so many different playing fields, and Gene nailed it right on the head. This doesn't have to be about the industry. It's about professional people who are obsessed with their profession while their personal life dissolves. Like, he hit it right on the head.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, the inspiration, he even admitted to that in the beginning of the review, is he observed and listened to another film goer walking out saying they expected a musical. That validates his feelings for the film, and that just shows that encouragement of how he feels about the movie. And it's odd to me because Roger said it, this movie made him feel funny, and I feel funny about both reviews because in a way they're both kind of right, because it's almost like I want to merge these two critics together to kind of justify an example of them, because Roger speaks to the exact same points that kind of we spoke to, is this needs multiple views, and Gene just nails it and he gets it on the first go. Not everybody's going to be that lucky to get this on the first go, and that's okay, because this one deserves to have a follow-up to it. And when we talk about Ebert saying it's chaotic, yeah, it is chaotic. Even with me, that took, like I said in the beginning, open and honest, that I didn't get it my first time. I was part of that group that saw it a couple times because I dedicated. I wanted to know this movie. I wanted to know this character because I had a big respect for Bob Fosse at the time of high school. To me, I loved his work. So I think in a way, these two both combined make good points, but again, it's a good point if it's only merged together.
I understand what you're saying. And we've had this conversation before where it's like, okay, are you judging this film on how much you appreciate it and what it's influenced by? Or are you judging it by the sense that I am watching a movie to review it, to tell people whether or not they should go see it? I don't buy Roger's point of, well, it's just 8½, so don't go see it. It's chaotic. That's not enough for me. If anything, if you tell me that Bob Fosse made a movie that's essentially a rehash of 8½, take my money. Like, that's not a detriment to me. You know, you can't tell me that it's not worth seeing because it's not original. Okay, watch this movie again and tell me what's not original about it. I've already given you my opinion. I've never seen a movie made like this. I don't think I'll ever see a movie made like this. I think a lot of people would agree on that. This is where it bugs me that I agree with Gene so much on this, is because he gets it, and it's a little troubling that he gets it. Maybe he gets it too well. Maybe he is one of those people he's talking about that's so obsessed with his profession. We already know that he was always jealous of Roger's likability, and his ego was badly damaged by this. This negative, somewhat nihilistic movie spoke to a guy who's normally against negativity and nihilism in movies. This was a rare find of a review of this film, because I think we saw a Siskel that we don't get to see very often, and that's an honest and open one, not a spicy and catchphrasey one.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because if we look at Ebert too, if we look at the book Life itself, and he has a history of that fame, he has a history of alcohol, partying, and things like that. So to me, this review would have been more relatable, and it would have proved a lot more point if he just took, like you said, 8.5 out of it, because I think that's a mute point. Because if we're looking at a movie at this time, we've had this conversation before. There's copycats. And when we take a movie about the industry, what more do you want that's different? At this time, you're gonna have similarities to it. So of course you're gonna have a director that is into drugs, or there's an evil industry, whatever it may be. So this is going to be the comparison to it. So I think leaving the 8.5 critique out of it, it was pointless. Starting the review and exactly going off his feelings of, again, I'll say the simplistic term that he said, it made me feel funny, because that should be the basis of where he's going to go with it. What made him feel funny? Not to kind of sideways it and say it made me feel funny because it's a different movie, because that doesn't make you feel funny. What made you feel funny is exactly what we spoke about, which is a lot of kind of the uncomfortable topics, the uniqueness of the editing, the uniqueness of the tone, the uniqueness of how this movie goes right into a character study. That's where we should have seen a good explanation of why this movie made you feel funny. Don't give me some bullshit answer of an 8.5 comparison to it, because that's not going to convince me to not go to the movie. What an honest review would have been, I'm not sure about this movie. I'm not sure what it was trying to do. I'm not sure why I'm feeling this way. So I can't recommend it, but some people might like it. Because when this movie came out, I guarantee you, this got probably mixed reviews from audiences, not so much the Academy, but audiences by itself.
I mean, what Ebert comes off as to me in this review is the guy that comes out of some, let's say, existential art house movie and just starts talking and showing the room how much he knows and how many movies he's seen, where the real appreciator of the movie is sitting silent in thought about what they just experienced and trying to find the right words to describe it. And I think that is where Gene's critique comes in so meaningful to me, because he doesn't have that film boy, fanboy, pretentiousness that Roger's really kind of throwing out right now.
Yeah. And the one thing that I wish they really would have brought up, and I know we went on the character focus on it, and I really wish they talked about the obvious, the musical numbers, which to me, I don't even consider this a musical. And that's always irritated me a little bit, of this being considered a musical. But the dance numbers are fantastic. But I think a zeroed in focus on what it got recognized for during the Academy Awards, which is the phenomenal editing, this one is probably one of the most unique pieces of it, because it's the most abstract editing that I've seen in a movie ever. So if you want a kind of an original editing style, this is the movie I would give an example to. And this is where I would have given credit, especially to what really gave us that feeling of feeling funny, or what gave us that feeling of a character focused story. So, and I think that's what the Chew kind of missed. And I think that's what the Academy actually recognized that we missed in this critique.
Yeah, so the editor, Alan Heim, he's the one that does the commentary on the Criterion. And here's a cool thing. He played himself in the movie. He played the editor in all that jazz. And the office that they're in, the editing room, is the editing room that they edited Lenny in. Anyone that has like an assistant role or a piano player role or a choreographer role, all these people in this movie were what they were in real life. Like Bob Fosse surrounded himself with the people he'd been working with for years in these just meaningless little roles because he was literally building his life. He was building his world on screen. And one of the things that Alan Heim says is that, yeah, they spent months editing Lenny. They spent half the time on this one because Fosse trusted Heim with what he was doing. The whole opening Lights Are Bright on Broadway dance number when he's doing the auditions, he used the first cut that Alan Heim brought. He's like, yep, that's it. That was in my mind. He's like, you've worked with me long enough to know what I want, and that's what I wanted. So that's another reason why this movie feels so personal, because he surrounded himself with the people to make this movie that knew him better than anybody. And it showed when it came to award season because those technical aspects, costume and art design and editing, they all won Oscars. And these are all people that worked with him for years. So again, it kind of, that writing his own obituary, almost writing his own eulogy analogy that Siskel makes. Mwah, perfect.
Yeah, and this was a year that was tough competition too when it comes to the Academy Awards. And I think it really makes me feel good about this movie getting the recognition that it has, because one, with all the aspects and some facts that I didn't even know, so thank you for bringing that up, is a lot of those like kisses that we have on that movie really shines. And even without me knowing that aspect of it, we feel it as just watching the movie. And I think it's awesome that we got that recognition from these movies compared to these domino movies that really they were up against. So, and I love the fact that it gives this year of the Academy Awards really gave me a good feeling that the art was recognized, not the most popular, not the politics, because this movie was so abstract, especially with the technical aspects of it, that it did get recognized for a lot of those things that you would think it would have mixed opinions, not just on the character or the story, but on the technical aspects. It was considered a musical, but it wasn't really a full musical. It really took some risk, and the risk really paid off with this movie.
Agreed. So, man, I'm going to have to like really swallow my pride and give Gene Siskel an A on this review. Like, it really is everything that I think and more. And that's very rare because, you know me, I'm not a critic. I don't consider myself a critic. I'm an analyzer and appreciator. And for me to appreciate this guy's review, and most of the time I'm like, Gene, what the hell? It means so much. And I'm glad it was this film that did it.
Yeah, and I think combined, this is probably one of the best conversations or best disagreements these two had. But at the same time, I think Roger, I was relating to, and I was really digging the first introduction to his review. But then again, he loses me at the 8.5 comparison.
So what do you give him?
I'm giving him a 1.5 on it because, again, you have to convince people if you're going to see it, you're going to nod and why, how it made you feel. And he got too caught up in the brilliant summary that Gene did, where he didn't know where to go. So his first defensive mechanism was to compare it to 8.5, which was a complete disappointment.
Which I guarantee you, most of the people watching public television or whatever the hell they were watching this show on didn't even know what 8.5 was. You know, like in the 80s and then the 70s, especially before VHS, that was an art house movie that you had to go find a theater to play. It wasn't just playing on TV. It wasn't just available on the video shelf. So it was a reach already. The fact that this is 1979 makes it a double reach. So I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah. But at the same time, again, those that are just seeing this, you have to give it at least 2 times if you're unsure about it. This is one of those movies. I couldn't stress that enough.
Agreed, 100%. And The Criterion version is so good. There's so many supplemental materials. The commentary is great. There's a Gene Shalit interview with Bob Fosse that's like 20 minutes long that really just, you see the man and his process, and you really see what Roy Scheider was doing with that character. And then there's a great little piece too where Anne Reinking and Ezra Bett Foldy, who plays his daughter, just, recently, all aged and mature, sitting on a couch talking about how they got into the movie. And this is the part that made me laugh. Anne Reinking had to audition 10 times to play herself in the movie. And she's like, he probably would have cast me anyway, but he never believed in letting people just have something. Like, you had to work for it. And he made me audition over and over and over again to play my fucking self. And I think, again, this movie is, 50 years old almost. No, 40 years old. And that shit still resonates with her after all these years, where it's like, yeah, the movie's still going. Like, we're still living this life that Bob Fosse gave us. And I think that just makes it even that much more entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, like him or hate him as a person, whatever the opinion may be based on the research that you do, but there's going to be no denying that he was a master of his craft when it comes to stage and screen. So he was a name then, and right now I just hope that people get familiar with his work. He created some of the best choreographed Broadway shows and some of the best movies that really zero in on the character, that really contrast what he did on Broadway. So I think it's an important thing, and if anybody's listening, to really deep dive into Bob Fosse.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to do this episode about this filmmaker and have that great of experience going over these critics' reviews of the movie. And there's only one way we can top it. Next week, we are doing Ghostbusters 2. Justin's pick to follow up to All That Jazz. We're going to be doing a sequel thing because I brought a sequel after that. But yes, that is the movie that we will be doing next week. Make sure you watch it before listening. As always, if you want to hear our true review of the movie and all the thoughts that maybe slipped through our minds in the conversation, go to our Letterboxd. I'm under the Cultworthy Studios. Justin's under the Movie Wire. Make sure that you follow us on YouTube, on Instagram, on all the socials. You can find all my stuff at thecultworthy.com. Justin?
You can find me at themoviewire.com and any of the socials at Movie Wire Show.
We would love it if you subscribe to not just Back to the Balcony, but to both of our shows. And I just cannot wait for next week's conversation, man.
It's a good contrast, so I can't wait for the next 2 episodes. I think they're going to be a lot of fun.
It'll be a lot of fun. Everyone, we'll see you next week on Back to the Balcony.